Good evening, everyone. Some people are still coming in, but we'll start. We'll get rolling. I'm Malinowski. I'm a professor here in the Environmental Policy Program, and I'd like to welcome everyone here, all the students, all the community people. Always lovely to see everyone. And we are really have a very special guest here tonight. We call her our very own Kelly Malinowski. We still own her. Kelly is a MIIS alum, and she proudly bragged from the MPA program already from 2013. It seems like yesterday. But Kelly was an MPA student, but basically, secretly in her heart, was doing an environmental policy specialization. And won a Sea Grant fellowship, right, from as she graduated, and that was a kind of a bounce into a really terrific professional trajectory. And Kelly today is the project manager at the California Coastal Conservancy based out of Oakland, and is really one of the leading climate adaptation thinkers, doers, talkers, movers, shaker in the Bay Area, and that's what she's going to talk about today is regional collaboration in the use of green infrastructure in climate adaptation planning and wetlands restoration. So let us join me in giving her a big
Hi, students, community. It's so awesome to be back. Highly recommend trying to come back and talk once you graduate. As Professor Zarsky said, my name is Kelly Malinowski. I am a MIIS alumna from 2013. I did get an MPA, but it was in International Environmental Policy, and so I was an environmental policy fangirl in most of the classes, and I really found that bridging those two camps helped with the position that I have now at the Coastal Conservancy that I'll talk about. So I'm here today to talk to you about regional collaboration on climate resilience and green infrastructure in the San Francisco Bay region, so just a couple hours north of us, the promise, the progress, and the implementation challenges.
Could you get that light off? Maybe it's sort of bouncing.
Sure, yeah.
Here.
Maybe easier.
It might be a little easier for everybody to see. But let me get the right one. Oh.
There. So first I'll talk about climate impacts in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm sure most of you are familiar with climate change impacts that are happening and study that, so I'll just breeze through that. I'll talk about my agency, the California State Coastal Conservancy. Then I'll talk about Measure AA, which is a really innovative regional finance mechanism that started in 2016 in the Bay Area and funds a lot of resilience work. I'll talk about, most of my presentation will be on the state of the San Francisco Bay climate work, as well as green infrastructure and living shorelines, and specifically going over some challenges that have been happening and some goals that we have for this regional work. And then if we have time at the end, each of these topics could deserve its own talk, but I can talk about environmental justice, infrastructure financing, and managed retreat. So we'll hopefully have some time to just briefly touch on those huge subjects, and then happy to answer questions at the end and talk more after too. And I will be available to you guys via email even after today. So climate change impacts are here. They're not future threats, and we're already seeing them today, and that is no surprise to any of us. And even with efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions today, we'll see climate impacts through mid-century. So in the San Francisco Bay, we're already seeing climate change impacts. This map shows 66 inches of sea level rise, so looking a little bit into the future. But some of the impacts that we've already seen in the San Francisco Bay Area include in 2015 and 2016, we had a big El Nino year. We had a 2012 and 2016 4-year drought that, if y'all remember, I still see water saving signs in the background here, which is awesome. We have less coastal fog. Sea level rise has risen 8 inches in the past century. Temperature has increased 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit from 1950 to 2005. There is more fires. We've already seen fires this year in the North Bay. There was the Camp Fire in 2018, the Atlas, Tubbs, and Mountain fires, among others, in 2017 in the Bay Area. And we've also seen parts of Highway 101 in Marin County flood during king tides, so those are the big high tides we get in the winter. And we've also seen parts of Highway 37, which is a big thoroughfare in Sonoma County flood during king tides as well. So we're already getting present day living. And so even with global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, still in the San Francisco Bay, we will see a significant temperature increase by mid-century. Precipitation will continue to be variable with booms and busts. We'll get droughts, we'll get big storms. Winter storms will be more intense. We could have longer and deeper droughts, and sea level rise could rise as high as 10 inches or more by 2100. And so I don't know if you guys remember, but back in September, leading up to the September 23rd UN Climate Summit, the San Francisco Chronicle joined 200 other news outlets to cover climate change exclusively, and they were really digging into different topics. So they highlighted, among many other issues, the need to really move quickly on adaptation. And so this headline read, as the symptoms of climate change reveal themselves, the need to prepare for sea level rise grows more stark each year. And so throughout September, the Chronicle, among other agencies, covered climate change exclusively, and you guys can always look back at those articles for resources. So now I just want to dive into who is the State Coastal Conservancy. So when I was a MIIS student, I did not know the State Coastal Conservancy. I knew who the Coastal Commission was. They regulate the coast and do coastal plans and permits. I knew who the Ocean Protection Council was. They do a lot of great ocean policy work. But the State Coastal Conservancy is another state agency established in 1976 to protect, enhance, and increase public access to the California coast. And so we're one of 3 of California's coastal zone management agencies, alongside the Coastal Commission that regulates the coastline, and then BCDC, the Bay Conservation Development Commission, which regulates the bay, and then we're kind of like the cool, non-regulatory grant-making sister that works with partners on the ground to implement and fund projects. And so we work along the entirety of the California coast, and 75% of the population of California is within our jurisdiction. We work throughout the entire coastal watershed, and so the Coastal Commission and BCDC have a small shoreline band within which they work. We work up through the watershed, so we can work on kind of full watershed solutions and full restoration of complete systems throughout the full watersheds. And we also work in the 9-county Bay Area. And so some of our accomplishments that I wanted to highlight is we've done 200 new coastal access ways, we've protected 300,000 acres of land, we've restored 34,000 acres of wetlands, and we've built 210 miles of trail. So we have a really broad mandate, and we sit under the Natural Resources Department, like many of the state environmental agencies. And so our mandate has been really flexible and enabled us to work on not only habitat and coastal restoration and public access, but pivot to work more on climate change as well. So next I want to talk about our Climate Ready grant program. And so this is kind of our brand for all of our climate work and our climate grants. And the exciting thing about this program and why I love it so much is when I was a Sea Grant Fellow almost 6 years ago with the State Coastal Conservancy, I came in at the first round of this grant program, which was super exciting. The agency was still learning about climate change, and we were still wondering what projects are out there. So our first solicitation for grants was super broad. We said, you know, you can do planning, you can do implementation, it can be for any impact, and we had a huge response. So this has been a really successful grant program, and we're now in our 7th round. And specifically this program, the goal is to help natural resource and human communities along the California coast and San Francisco Bay adapt to the impacts of climate change and also mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And so far we've awarded $14 million for 60 projects. But the need is far greater than that. And so this program funds and supports a range of project types and project phases. So a lot of funders only fund like implementation, shovel on the ground. We'll fund planning, we'll fund design, we'll fund permitting, we'll fund monitoring, all the less sexy parts of a project that actually make a project happen. And so we support a range of project types or phases, and then we also support a range of project types. So this project program can support community-based adaptation planning, it can support wetland restoration, so it's pretty broad, and that's just kind of how we brand our climate work. But since we've been around since 1976, and since we're a natural resource agency and we restore systems, we like to say we've been working on climate change since the 70s. But we have been explicitly working on our Climate Ready program since 2009 is when our policy passed. So next, and I know that some of you guys know about this already, I wanted to talk about kind of another climate-related funding mechanism that we work on, and that's called Measure AA and the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. So if you came to the speaker series last year, our former Bay Program Manager, Matt Gerhardt, came and talked about Measure AA and the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. And so this was formed via state legislation in 2008 to form what is called the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. And what that is actually just an agreement between our agency and a regional agency. It's a joint powers agreement to make us one agency. And so for 8 years, from 2008 to 2016, our staff and staff from the other agency were just looking for ways to create funding. So the charge of the authority was just to create funding and give it out to restore habitats in the San Francisco Bay Area. So it took 8 years and lots of polling, but finally in June of 2016, we put a $12 a parcel tax on the ballot, and it passed. And so that's $12 charged to each parcel throughout the entirety of the Bay Area. So all 9 counties, everybody in all 9 counties that owns land has to pay. And it generates $25 million a year for 20 years. So it's really exciting because it's the first regional funding measure of its kind in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's $500 million over 20 years that we can count on every year. It's not bond funds or other strings attached funds that you get from the state. And it can fund habitat restoration, and that's any habitat in the Bay listed in our kind of habitat goals document. It can fund public access as long as it's associated with habitat restoration, and it can fund flood protection as long as it's associated with habitat restoration. And this was the first regional measure of its funding measure of its kind to pass in the Bay Area ever. Super innovative and super exciting. And so I want to tell you guys how it's been going. I credit my MPA and IEP skills here with, I actually got the opportunity to draft the first grant guidelines and the first request for proposals, which is making me really sound like an MPA right now, but I really think that MIIS is the reason I was able to kind of design this grant program and having, you know, environmental and MPA classes here. So that was a really good experience if you have a chance to do that in your jobs after school. So I just wanted to go through some examples of the projects that we've funded. We've had 2 grant rounds so far, and the second round was $67.5 million for 5 projects. And you probably heard me say we only have $25 million a year. And so the authority decided to authorize multi-year funding for one of the projects I'll mention later. So that means it decreases the pot, but it's cool because you can, it helps facilitate resilience because you can plan ahead for project funding. And so we've had 2 rounds, and I want to go over some of those projects. And before I do, I just wanted to highlight a couple exciting fun facts that have happened in the first 2 years of the authority. And so we're in our 3rd grant round right now, and the RFP closes in December. So we'll see what kind of projects we get for round 3. But in the first 2.5 years, we've already produced an equity report. And so back a couple years ago, the advisory committee, which kind of oversees the authority in addition to the board, wanted to hear more about environmental justice. And so we invited a lot of community-based organizations to talk about environmental justice, and it led to the board recommending that we do a full equity assessment for the entire grant program and organization. And so we just completed that report with a consultant, and among extending the application period from 2 to 3 months, which is what we did this year, and it's kind of our first programmatic change, she also recommended things like having a separate track for community-based organizations, because you can imagine huge restoration partners are going after this $25 million a year, and they have grant writers and they have expertise, but the equity report recommends a separate track for community-based adaptation planning, which I think will be great. So that was a really big accomplishment in the first 2 years. There's also something called the BRIT that was created, and this is in an effort to cut through the permitting red tape. And so 2 of the biggest impediments to restoration projects in the Bay are money and permitting. And so the BRIT is one person from each permitting agency are in an office together, and they're working on the same projects at the same time, and they're pushing through the restoration projects quicker than the development projects because we are funding the BRIT. So it's kind of paying permitters again to do their job, but bureaucracy happens and climate change is quick, and so this is what we're trying to make sure that projects happen as quickly as possible. And why are we working so fast? Because this book came out in 1999, and it was kind of like our Balin's Goals document, and it said, you know, what do we need to restore, which habitats and how much do we need to restore in the bay to get back to a healthy ecosystem. In 2016, this was updated for climate change, and one of the main recommendations was restore complete systems from the top to the bottom of the watershed, but also we need to restore all the wetlands in the bay, need to be kind of already being restored by 2030 to keep up with the sea level rise curve. So that's kind of why we're working so quick and why we're trying to, you know, address these barriers of funding and permitting, so it remains to be seen if there's any other issues why projects aren't happening. We don't know what they are yet, so hopefully they start to pick up. So some project examples. The Tiscornia Marsh project was a planning grant to do final design for a marsh restoration to protect a disadvantaged community in Marin. This draw project, which somebody, shout out, girl in the back, worked on, it was super cool. Worked with students to do plantings for restoration. 900 Innis is in South San Francisco, and it's a remediation and soil cleanup project, and so it was a former boatyard, tons of PCBs and toxics there, and it's just a soil cleanup project. And there'll be a future park and wetland restoration there. The South San Francisco Bay Shoreline project was the one that got a big chunk of money this year from us in multi-year funding. That project protects Alviso, which is another disadvantaged community, with a combination of wetlands and levees for the South Bay Salt Ponds project. So if you've ever flown out of SFO and looked out the window and saw big color swatches, that is former salt ponds that we're turning back into wetlands to protect the South Bay infrastructure and humans. And then the San Leandro Treatment Project is using a wetland as tertiary treatment for wastewater. The Sonoma strategy is looking at a strategy to acquire land for the Highway 37 project. So which parcels can we buy so that we might raise the highway to do a causeway, because that highway is already flooding. And what else? Ensenal Dune is a dune restoration project. Deer Island's another kind of land use planning for future acquisition for sea level rise. And the Montezuma project was interesting because it was actually to a private landowner. So because this money is so flexible, it can go to private folks too, and so this person implemented a wetland restoration using our funds. So those are the first 2 years of Measure AA funding, and there's actually a page on the website for each of these. I'll just put up the website again. It's sfbayrestore.org, and you can read tons more about these projects on the website. So next, I want to pivot to talk about kind of the state of San Francisco Bay climate work, which I'll focus on most of my presentation. And so far, most folks have been working on sea level rise vulnerability assessments. That's been like our huge focus, and then of course, in 2017, we got hit with a bunch of fires, and that's kind of pivoted a lot of people's focus to other impacts. But so far, we've completed 9 sea level rise assessments vulnerability assessments for the 9 counties, and those have been done by BCDC, our sister agency that regulates the bay. And then we funded some additional assessments using a different model in San Mateo County and Marin County. There has been one regional sea level rise assessment that's wrapping up right now that looked at vulnerable communities, transportation, priority development areas, and priority conservation areas, and that's also being led by BCDC working with a regional transportation agency. A lot of the jurisdictions are sort of pivoting from doing their sea level rise vulnerability assessment to now coming up with adaptation strategies for sea level rise, and then at the same time doing vulnerability assessments for additional impacts. The ones that are most immediate are fire, heat, and also things like precipitation and groundwater. So even though we've done sea level rise assessments, things have been pretty piecemeal because we haven't integrated precipitation, we haven't integrated groundwater, and so now people are kind of expanding to catch up. And different jurisdictions are at different places. I'm kind of oversimplifying, but in general, this is like the sense that there's like a pivot to adaptation to sea level rise, and then figuring out how vulnerable we are to these other impacts. And so there's a ton of work happening in the Bay. And there's a lot of regional groups and agencies kind of doing climate planning work. And so I kind of wanted to highlight this challenge for you guys. So BCDC that I mentioned has been doing sea level rise vulnerability assessments since 2011. They have done them for all 9 counties, they did it for the region, and now they're kicking off a year-long regional shoreline adaptation planning process. A lot of people are super fatigued with all the planning. We know it needs to happen, but they're kind of seen as the planning group. And they recently just passed 2 policy amendments to the Bay Plan. One was led by Clessie Bennett, also a MIIS alum, and she did the Environmental Justice Amendment. I think she came and talked to you guys at some point about that. And then we also did an amendment of bay fill for habitat. So back in the day, people were putting trash and fill in the bay to build cities on it, like Foster City. But now we want to put sediment into wetlands to help them keep up. And so now we can do that permit-wise, thanks to BCDC. So that's kind of what they've been working on in this space. BARC is just a quick consortium of our 4 regional agencies. Normally, the regional agencies are the one leading climate work in a region, but BARC is only 2 staff. So they mostly kind of coordinate the agencies, but they can't do a ton more. They led the big Resilient by Design year, which was great leadership, but with 2 staff, you know, we keep telling them maybe you guys should be like the one organizer, but not enough staff. MTC is our regional transportation agency, so they are charged with implementing our sustainable community strategy, which is state legislation. So they're working on a Plan Bay Area 2050. So it's like a plan for what the Bay is going to look like in 2050 with regards to like housing, transportation, and this year they're actually putting climate change in there, which is great. BayCan is a group of local governments, but it's mostly planners and it's membership based and it's been around for like a year. They have a few hundred people in that group. Charge has been around for a few years and is just like re-emerging and rebranding itself. Yeah, so it's okay. You want to move it up?
I think it's like it's around the back.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I'll do that quick.
It's important. Should I wait? So Charge is a local engineers group. So it's kind of like BayCan, but instead of planners, it's engineers. Bar is a group of local health departments from the counties. And then of course there's tons of like community and public efforts happening. There's a lot of climate emergency declarations. But you can see that one's a state agency, one's a regional agency. This is just a membership-based group. This group is engineers. They're really focused on engineering solutions. And so there's a lot of competing interests and a lot of competing groups, but nobody is in charge. There's not really many regulations. There's no stick, there's no leader, and there's no governance. So this is kind of what we're dealing with. And you can see if folks are looking from Sacramento, they think like, oh, the Bay has like got it together. You've got all the regional groups. You're doing really good. Thank you. That's okay. So that's kind of like the challenge. And a lot of folks see this, and a lot of folks know this, and I keep channeling, you know, my MIIS experience. I'm just like, let it emerge, just like let it emerge. Maybe a leader will come, but it's causing a lot of anxiety. So who is the lead with so many people planning and no one in charge is unclear what next steps will be for the region. Some groups have better reasons to be the lead. BCDC is kind of pushing for it, but they have a small band of influence around the Bay. So it is unclear who would be best to lead the region. And so far it's just kind of all these disparate groups. And I put this in their readings. This came out in 2017. It's called Governance Gap. Some researchers, Mark Lubell and his assistant Francesca, did some research and polled a bunch of local governments in the Bay in 2017 to identify this issue. And so if you want to read more about it, the link is in the readings for this talk. And they did some follow-up research in 2019 on this that you can find on their site too. But it just kind of highlights this like lots of coordination, but nobody leading. So I just wanted to go over some of these goals and challenges in terms of regional collaboration. I've already said there's 101 jurisdictions, lots of special districts, lots of local, state, federal agencies, lots of regional groups. There's lots of plans. So, you know, people have doing general plans, people have climate action plans, we have Plan Bay Area, we have BCDC Shoreline Plan, we have our Baylands Goals, which is our plan. There's no policy or stick. There's a lot of siloed systems and structures. The systems and structures are old. And so we're trying to plan a new future using old systems and structures, which is a problem. And we're trying to design those new systems and structures as we're in them, which is also a problem. There's a lack of understanding and consensus on what to do. There's a lack of agreement on roles. There's competition for funding, and there's a lack of agreement on who should pay. And some goals that folks have for the region, probably the biggest one that I've heard is folks want to do regional communication materials. A lot of local jurisdictions don't have capacity to do community outreach and education, and they could use like a regional effort to do public outreach. A gaps analysis, we did this for the South Bay a couple years ago, but just throwing up a map of all the projects in the Bay and seeing where there's holes in the shoreline, the sea level rise, for example. And so Charge is sort of doing that now that they have revamped their group. Folks have talked about a climate services center. I worked with some folks to apply for a grant that we didn't get a few years ago for that. We're kind of doing it in an ad hoc fashion. Myself and some other agencies working on this. Modeling water level changes with projects. So you can do vulnerability assessments, but once you have a project, you have to do specific modeling to see how it works. Progress on project implementation. A lot of people are feeling like planning angst. Everyone wants to implement projects, which is something that my agency is really good at. One regional plan. So we're going to have Plan Bay Area, which is a regional plan from MTC, our regional transportation agency. But then we'll also have the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan from BCDC, which is a state agency. They're talking to each other, but they're not exactly the same. And then in terms of BCDC's Regional Shoreline Adaptation Planning process, they're kind of just kicking this off right now, and they're building stakeholder support. But some of the principles that they already put into the shoreline plan or that they want to propose are that the adaptation that folks do in the Bay is based on the operational landscape unit and the adaptation atlas. I know if you're in Professor Zarski's class, you learned about, but oh no. Oh, you'll have to, okay. So this, I'll talk about a little bit more too, but this is recently released. It's the Adaptation Atlas from the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and they are one of our main science partners in the Bay. There's a couple great big nonprofits that I like to say sprinkle science in all of our projects, and they did this. So this, I've been waiting for 2 years, super excited. And it defines nature's jurisdictions and for planning for nature-based adaptation. So basically, there's operational landscape units defined throughout the Bay that cut across normal jurisdictions and are based on natural processes like sediment delivery and watersheds. And then there's a short list of which nature-based adaptation strategies would work for that operational landscape unit. So the idea is that now this is done, local jurisdictions can take this, they can flip and see what unit they're in, they can read the short list of what strategies might work there, and then they can see who else is in their region that they might need to partner with. So yeah, feel free to, maybe I'll just like pass this around. Yeah. So one of the principles and goals of the Regional Shoreline Plan through BCDC is that people start there and look before looking to any other gray strategies, starting with the nature-based strategies in the Adaptation Atlas. We're trying nature-based adaptation first. I'll talk about that a little bit after this. We're prioritizing and protecting frontline communities first, and then we're working quickly to 2030 because we're running out of time for the nature-based strategies. So what are nature-based strategies? So nature-based adaptation is also called green infrastructure or living shorelines, and it's using ecological processes to mitigate climate impacts. And so pictured here is the reason I actually worked at the Conservancy. I decided to choose them for my fellowship because of this project, because they were actually implementing a nature-based adaptation strategy. So this is the Conservancy San Francisco Bay Living Shorelines project, and it's installed in the North Bay, kind of by Marin. And what it is oyster and eelgrass reefs in beds that create habitat, but they also attenuate waves. And my colleague Marilyn is the manager for this project, and she just installed another one in the South Bay called Giant Marsh. And she's continually looking around the bay for places to do oyster restoration, and there was tons of oysters historically in San Francisco Bay. It's actually really cool. So there's a lot of opportunities for oyster and eelgrass restoration, and that's for habitat, but it's also for humans to help us with climate change. So Executive Order B 3015 actually prioritized natural infrastructure, but again, this was not a stick. It was just suggestion. But we like to use this a lot in our back pocket when we're trying to push our agenda for nature-based adaptation. And why is this so important? Why am I saying that we need to try nature-based adaptation or living shorelines first? Why do we need to restore them by 2030? Why do we even care? I could probably tell you guys, but we're already seeing beaches disappearing, most notably in Southern California due to erosion and sea level rise. And so, I want to read you guys a little quote from this. Oh, okay. So it's estimated we'll lose 31 to 67% of Southern California's beaches by 2100 to erosion and with 1 to 2 meters of sea level rise. So by 2100, we could actually lose up to 67% of our beaches in Southern California, which is huge. I mean, huge hit to the economy, mental health, habitat, and why else do we care? In San Francisco Bay, we've lost 79% of our tidal marshes and 42% of our tidal flats to diking and filling of the bay between 1800 and 1998. So I kind of mentioned it earlier, but this is what our bay used to look like. And actually this used to be a river before it expanded into a bay. But back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, people were diking and filling parts of the bay to create, you can see all these are salt ponds converted to wetlands, but to create some of the cities. Can't remember where Foster City is. But there's a lot of fill placed in actual marshes to build cities onto the marshes, and that's kind of how we lost them. And so this work is important because in addition to historic loss and projected future loss of beaches and wetlands just due to erosion and sea level rise, coastal hardening can also choke beaches and wetlands off from their sediment supply and can actually make beaches erode away themselves. And so in addition to restoring what we've lost, we can also use systems like wetlands and beaches for protection against sea level rise and flooding, and that's nature-based adaptation, aka living shorelines, aka green infrastructure. So this is sort of something that was really sold in the Bay Area, the horizontal levee. Everyone's on board with this now, but we still have to test it out. Like most nature-based adaptation. But it's a good example of protecting or restoring a complete system and using a complete system as protection. So it's not just, the tidal flat and the wetland, it's extending all the way up. And so next I just wanted to go through some examples of projects that we've either funded or worked on that are considered nature-based adaptation strategies. So this one is the Seal Beach Sediment Augmentation Project in Southern California, and it was testing a novel approach to wetland restoration and sediment augmentation by doing a thin layer sediment placement. So they basically sprayed on top of the marsh a thin layer of sediment, and all the plants poked through, which is great. So it worked. Obviously, there was lots of permitting. Harvest mouse, endangered species, lives in the marsh. But this was one of the first times it was tested. I think it was the first time it was tested on the West Coast. So we're still kind of in the pilot demonstration phase of these approaches. Another one I wanted to highlight is the Cardiff Beach Dunes Project. And so this restored dunes alongside Highway 1, and it was actually the first nature-based adaptation project in this state to protect an existing highway that was already being flooded with a nature-based strategy. And so this one just happened. The Surface Point Managed Retreat Project is down in Ventura. It's a little bit older. It was actually our first managed retreat project. And this just retreated and restored public access to provide room for dune habitat. So just kind of moved everything back, restored the dunes. And then the South Bay Salt Ponds Restoration Project that I mentioned, biggest wetland restoration on the West Coast. Turning historic salt ponds in the bay into wetlands and using those wetlands to protect communities and infrastructure in Silicon Valley. And one of our ponds is actually right in front of the Facebook campus and currently protecting the campus. So I just want to go over a couple of opportunities and challenges with nature-based adaptation. I already talked about this executive order. It's an opportunity just because we can have it in our back pocket, but again, there's no regulation. It's just prioritized, suggested. There's a lot of regional planning happening, and so as a natural resource agency, we kind of insert ourselves into these regional planning processes to push nature-based adaptation and protection of natural resources. And so in addition to BCDC's regional vulnerability assessment that they're completing, we help them to draft like a one-pager on nature-based adaptation for that. We're putting nature-based strategies into their shoreline plan. But then also working with Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is a transportation agency. They're doing Plan Bay area. They've never included much climate before. We wrote a resilience chapter 2 years ago to put in the plan and to make it in. But this time they're actually working with us so that we can put nature-based strategies into the plan. The way that that plan works, they have to go through CEQA to prove that the housing in the plan won't be flooded. So then they have to put up levees around the bay. So we came in, got really upset looking at these maps and said, no, we have tons of projects planned around the bay already. You know, we need to at least put our projects in here that are restoring wetlands, that are restoring dunes, that will protect the bay. And so that's kind of a policy intervention we're working on right now to, we're working with SFEI, the regional agency that wrote that book, and a couple other kind of science organizations and natural resource agencies in the bay to make sure that current natural resource projects and future planned nature-based adaptation strategies are included in that plan with this regional transportation agency. So definitely reaching across the aisle a lot. There's regional wetland monitoring that's starting. So the EPA just gave a grant to a local science organization to do regional wetland monitoring, and we haven't been doing that. So now we'll have one metric for how are the wetlands doing, are they keeping up, what's their sediment like, and hopefully have similar ways to report so that we can monitor wetlands for sea level rise and make sure they're doing okay. We recently worked on a study in San Mateo County that looked at the wave attenuation benefit, carbon sequestration benefit, and bird population benefit of the wetlands in San Mateo County. And now some folks from the Nature Conservancy and others are building on that study and looking at parametric insurance. So this has been piloted before with coastal reefs, I think once, at least. And so there's going to be a pilot in San Mateo County on the Bay Shore looking at, you know, how can we get homeowners to pay for the wetlands that's protecting their house. So if people are interested, I think the next steps on that is they're circling up with a smaller group of researchers from Santa Cruz to look specifically at the kind of biological values of the wetlands. So if you're interested, let me know. That effort's kicking off. I'm sure they could use some students. The adaptation atlas I kind of already touched on, but it really helps us kind of get ahead of adaptation by showing people what nature-based strategies are out there. A little story on how adaptation has been happening to date is Foster City was a city that was built in the 70s, and it was built out into the bay. It's like a big peninsula with a series of lagoons. And they filled in the bay to build their city, and now they're super at risk for sea level rise because they're in an old wetland. And so they ended up in FEMA's flood zone. So then instead of having to pay a bunch of money in flood insurance, they decided to raise their levees about 6 feet. And the way that that all went down is Foster City was in the flood zone. They hired their normal consulting company that they always hire. That consulting company gave them 3 options: levy seawall or levy seawall combo. They chose the cheapest one, and then they taxed the humans that live there, and now they're implementing it. So there wasn't a chance for policy intervention. These things happen so quickly at so many different scales that we're hoping that the adaptation atlas is that intervention so that, you know, instead of just looking at, you know, seawall levy combo, that we're opening up people's minds to not just nature-based strategies, but hybrid approaches. And so there was talk of, well, you know, Foster City, if you guys would have maybe looked at putting an oyster reef out in front of your seawall, maybe it could have been 4 feet instead of 6 feet. So things like that. So this is like the main work that's happening for us in the field. And then the GRIT and Measure AA I already mentioned, 2 of the biggest impediments, permitting and funding to wetland restoration in the bay. And so we're hoping that the projects will start coming in the door now, and we're able to start doing them more quickly. If there's another gap we don't know of, we don't know yet. So met our gaps, and we're trying to charge ahead. Some challenges is in terms of nature-based strategies and living shorelines, we're pretty far behind the East Coast. They have a lot more knowledge than us in that way, especially with oysters and oyster restoration. So we have to do a lot more pilot projects and demonstration projects. And so having easier permitting will hopefully help us do that, because we obviously have to test them and then scale them up and get them implemented by 2030. 11 short but long years. That's the time issue. Familiarity, of course, like I said, not a lot of folks are familiar with this. If you think about who's actually doing adaptation, it's local jurisdictions, and it's the planner or the engineer. And so if those people don't know about nature-based adaptation, living shorelines, they don't know it's out there, they won't use it. And so we have a lot of education to do. And then the last is translation to engineering language. So we actually have a project with Marin County flood control engineer right now, and he's looking at slope and grain size of bay beaches in Marin County to try to define like what is the sweet spot for which place to prevent erosion and sea level rise. And so yeah, science to policy translation, but also like environmental science to engineer translation. Yeah, and so if we have time, I can touch on the other three, but.
Great, so we have time to really, wonderful. All right, great. So I'm sure all of you have been storing up all your questions. So let's let it roll.
How did you guys come up with like the $12 for the parcel? Like, what kind of study did you use, or was that just like a number that's out there? Or?
Yeah, so we worked with our partner, since our state agency, it was pretty limited in what we can do politically and ballot measure wise. So we worked with Save the Bay, which is like the main nonprofit in San Francisco Bay. It was started by 3 women back in the 60s. Those women are the reason why the bay is not full of trash, and started that nonprofit. They hired a consulting company who works on political polling to do a lot of polling to see not only which election cycle we should go to. I think November 2016 was a primary, so a lot of liberal folks were getting out for either Bernie or Hillary for the Democratic ticket, and so that's why we chose June 2016, among other reasons. But it was like a super narrow margin. I know. The money, they had looked at like 16 and 12 and 10, and it just pulled the best in terms of like what people would be willing to pay. So yeah.
I just say something about that. So California law, state law, says that you have to pass a tax measure by a 2/3 vote. And so this measure had to pass by 2/3 in each of the 9 counties. So it was an extraordinary result in 2016. And there was a lot of thought, as Kelly said, put into, I mean, it's a flat tax, which those of you who know anything about tax policy is regressive. But, you know, if they were going to try to link benefits to the tax, like Chevron, who's right on the bay, or Facebook, it would have been politically dead. So it was actually a very clever strategy. And then what it meant was that every single property holder in the Bay Area is now invested in restoring the bay. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it's great. And on the SFARestore.org, we have historic documents you can see. I think we still have the maps up there of how people voted. Of course, like Napa, Sonoma, are a little bit further up, voted a little bit less. But like deep South Bay, we got a lot of votes. It's really interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting to look at. And it was interesting that another thing I was going to say about the authority is that we didn't put climate change into the legislation in 2008 or in the ballot measure in 2016, but it's been kind of discreetly woven throughout the project or throughout the program, and we've been able to use the program for climate adaptation because of its resilience. I'll move my way back.
Sure. How do you prioritize projects now that almost the entire bay, like the shoreline, has some kind of issue, right? So how do you prioritize, and then how do you rank projects, or how do you select them?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's like most of our job is like grant programs, and each grant program has its own criteria. But we have like a more broad criteria, and we look at things like, you know, do you have experience implementing this? Do you have the right partnerships? Is the landowner willing? And yeah, it's hard to prioritize between different projects, and it really depends on the grant program. I feel like for, you know, the authority, we'll look at those as a group, we'll look at Climate Ready as a group, and we try to do a good mix. The authority says that 50% of the funds have to go to the counties and regions based on population. And so some funding programs have things like that too, but definitely, yeah, it's hard. We never have to really choose between like an implementation project and a planning project, but there's a lot of criteria for each grant program, but like broadly, it's like, yeah, you have the right partnerships, you have the expertise, you have community support, are you going to be able to start soon, things like that. You have CEQA done, all your permits.
Did you guys have like a campaign strategy when this tax was passed or anything? Like, or was it just kind of like a general?
It was a very baby campaign. I think it was only like $1 million, which I'm told is basically like a penny in campaign world. Save the Bay loved the campaigns. I wasn't involved personally, but they targeted certain regions. And so I know they targeted a lot the South Bay. They even put up like a billboard, and they had a couple mailers, and then they had a couple commercials. But they were all targeted at certain spots in the Bay. And I know that if anybody had any sort of opposition against us, we would have lost.
There was opposition.
There was opposition, but they didn't like.
It was anti-tax opposition.
Yeah, they didn't like. If they would have like came out more and waged against us, we would have lost. But we had we made a deal with the labor people, the labor folks, to include project labor agreements, which says that the folks that actually do the construction work have to kind of follow labor practices, and they have to be unionized. And so the labor folks helped us pass it in some way. I'm not clear on all the details, but yeah, Save the Bay loved the campaign too. David Lewis, I think, has been on here to speak at one of these before, but it was really interesting, targeted campaign.
And they targeted as recreation and, you know, bring your child, have a picnic by the bay. It was a big, and it was so innocuous. I mean, who could not support that? And it was cheap.
Yeah.
So it was actually quite a brilliant political campaign.
So you said the largest restoration project is happening in South Bay in California, and Facebook's being protected. How much is Facebook putting up for their protection?
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny the position of Silicon Valley in the largest restoration.
I think we're working on it. I mean, historically, and I shouldn't say nothing, I know that they have a little project with one of the science partners that they're working on, but the Facebook and Google projects are very hush. I don't think that they've contributed to the South Bay Salt Pond restoration that's by them. They might have a little bit, but they're not involved in a huge way. I think it remains to be seen if they'll stay and if they're invested in the community or if they plan to leave when they flood. I know the last time, it was a couple years ago during Resilient by Design, a representative from Facebook came out and spoke with us, and we were saying, you've got two buildings here by our wetland, one of them's at the ground level, the other one's 2 feet up, what happened? And they were kind of saying, well, we only planned for 10 years in advance, we just grew a lot more than we thought, so we built the second building, but by the time they did, Menlo Park had adopted a 2-foot freeboard in their general plan for any new development, and so, I don't know. I mean, I don't think we have a big sense of like if these tech companies are going to stay and like help us, or if they're just going to leave. I don't know. And historically, like businesses have been the hardest to engage. I think when we're trying to. San Mateo County has done a good job, kind of bridging the gap. And there's like Genentech is a big like biotech company in San Mateo County that's like really supportive of San Mateo County's vulnerability assessment. I know that they kicked in resources. They like hosted meetings for us and things like that. So some are doing it, yeah.
I know you didn't get time to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it. I want to know about your environmental justice work, and especially like since a lot of these protection infrastructures are like right next to these giant tech corporations.
Yeah.
But like what's going on in communities and
Yeah, so environmental justice in general is like a super hot topic. Lots of people are working on it. I'm sure you guys are talking about it too. And I think it all started because at least the state agencies a couple years ago, a statewide alliance called the California Environmental Justice Alliance, statewide alliance with EJ groups, worked together and actually put their recommendations into Safeguarding California, which is our state's climate change plan. And it doesn't talk about humans a ton, it talks mostly about like what state agencies are going to do. But they got their recommendations in there, and so we went and got those recommendations, brought them back to our agency, started asking questions like, how do we support communities coming? How do we pay for food, transportation? How do we? And then this other organization kind of at the same time emerged called the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, or GARE, G-A-R-E. They're a national organization. They started doing these year-long trainings with local, state, and federal governments. And so it's basically like a year-long training, and then there's options to like continue the training. That's basically like, how do you make government more equitable? And so historically, government has been pretty racist. And in California, like, you know, the first governor like called for the extinction of indigenous people. And, you know, governments were responsible for redlining, putting people of color in the most like polluted neighborhoods. And so there's a really cool organization called Greenline, the Greenlining Institute. They're a big equity organization. They just came out with a really cool report that was making recommendations for grant makers for equity. Another one is the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. They came out with a sister report to Greenlining on how we should identify disadvantaged communities and like what viewers we should use and like where the different populations are and how we should define that stuff. And so after we did our year of GARE, we created equity guidelines that our board adopted, and now we're kind of implementing those in like 4 different groups. So some of the things we're working on is like funding, like where is our funding going, who's it benefiting, how do people access our funding, what are those barriers, how do we overcome those. Another one we're looking at is like internal practices. So actually our demographic should be equal to the demographic of California's population, and it's not. And so we're increasing the diversity of our staff, and we changed some hiring practices to open our pool of applicants more to get more applicants to get more potential for diversity. So yeah, and we're looking at like an implicit bias training, and we have a committee that's called JEDI, the Justice and Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committees. We're all Jedis, so pretty cool. So we meet like once every couple of months, and then we have subcommittees that are working on these other issues. And like BCDC, Plessy Bennett, like hats off to her, Miss Alumna, who led the Environmental Justice Amendment of the Bay Plan, like super, super crazy historic thing, very cool. And yeah, in general, we try to also see like how can we make sure our grantees are doing meaningful community engagement, not just checking the box. And something that's really inspiring on that end is the Air Resources Board that oversees and gives out the cap and trade money. They have like a really robust monitoring forum for community engagement that like gauges the spectrum from like ignore the community and like 5 steps later it's like defer to them. They have all these questions, so it's really inspiring that the world is like moving more to equity based. And a cool project to look up is the Marin City People's Plan. So there was 9 projects in this Resilient by Design competition, and that was the only one that was led by the community. And so there was some folks came in and the community wanted to learn permaculture, and so they taught them permaculture, and the community came up with their own plan. And then we just funded them. We helped them get funding for organizational development, and then we just gave them a grant for a project. So now they're going to start implementing their plan, which is super cool. And a lot of folks are pivoting to that. Just give, people live in this neighborhood, what do they want? Training to do their own stuff. Let's do that. Let's fund them. It's a really cool one.
So do you know how this is a different question, but do you know how the actual turning the salt ponds into marshes works? Because of the high salinity level, like how they have to dredge the salt out or...
Yeah, I don't know about it that much. I do know that some of the ponds we're keeping as ponds because shorebirds like ponds and they're not the same as like wetland birds, and there's a whole debate about that. But yeah, you could look at the website that has more information. Sadly, wasn't around for that part. But yeah, over here.
Another question.
Yeah.
Do you have, for your grantees, do you have a sort of like evaluation of what they do built into their plan? Like, do you require them to sort of map out and then to evaluate, we're going to do this to make sure we met all of our goals, and do you follow up on that?
We don't have, we don't enforce monitoring on our grantees, but we do, that is like, we get points for having a monitoring plan, and that's really dependent on the project too. And I think I can see both sides. Like on one end, especially with wetland monitoring, like we want to require things. But then if it's like a 2-person nonprofit, they don't have a lot of experience or expertise, you don't want to like overburden them.
Right.
So yeah, I was pretty shocked at the state because I remember being, a nonprofit and having to do all this report, like working at nonprofits and having to do all this reporting. We don't really require much from our grantees. We do like monitoring ourselves to make sure the project is still there for 20 years, because state money has to be invested for 20 years. But it's really dependent on the project. So like the Living Shorelines project, my colleague Marilyn for sure defines the monitoring parameters that she wants for her project. But the reason why I was excited about the EPA grant to do regional monitoring is because all those projects care about different things, you know? And like a lot of times, habitat restoration folks care about habitat restoration, so you know, we hadn't even looked at the wave attenuation of Marin wetland, or San Mateo's wetlands until like last year, just because, you know, when people do those things, they may monitor for, you know, plant growth or species or. More questions? Sure.
Do you know of any agency that,
I'll get back to you.
do you know of any agency that looking at the effect of sea level rise on the Sacramento Delta? Because technically that's outside the Bay Area.
I know that BCDC is finishing their like East Contra Costa study, which includes part of the Delta, but there's also a Delta Conservancy that's pretty new. They're like us, but they started like a few years ago. They might be, but as far as I know, to my knowledge, it's just BCDC's East Contra Costa study. But I'm not super familiar with that.
So I was fascinated by the part about lack of leadership and such, and so just thoughts on solving for that. Because it seems like there's so much great work being done, but it's all, as you described it, all over the board instead of pulling it all together in time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, I started reading like monthly calls with like just a few counties just to try and coordinate folks. I'm thinking that we're getting close to someone stepping up since BCDC is doing this regional shoreline plan. I think it needs to be legislation, to be honest. I think we'll just keep planning forever unless like somebody makes us do something, but that's just my personal opinion. There's been legislation on like regional collaboratives and like regional groups that need to form, but I feel like there needs to be legislation saying like everyone, you know, people have to put, SB 379 was a policy that passed that said everybody needs to update your general plan for climate change, but that's another box check. It's like, just throw it into the safety element, never look at it again. If you don't put it into other elements, it'll never get operationalized. And so I think it's probably legislation, to be honest. I mean, I came here from Michigan, you know, 7 years ago to study policy because I was working at this nonprofit, and a policy pass would make my life way easier, and I still hold on to like the policy solutions. I trust humans, but you know, we'll plan forever. We'll just keep planning. Yeah.
Similar to that, how do you think we move from just planning to implementation? Because there's all these great plans, a lot of the time nothing happens with them. How do you think we transition?
I think San Mateo and Marin are kind of my favorite counties because we funded their assessments, and I feel like they're really robust. BCDC did a great job too, but it wasn't like it wasn't always a full like stakeholder involvement multi-year process. San Mateo County is in like their phase 2 right now, where they've done a sea level rise assessment, and now they're looking at other impacts. But for the sea level rise piece, they have 2 pilot programs, and they're giving grants out to community-based organizations and cities. And so I think that's kind of how like a county would, that's how a county would support implementation of like cities. And of course, like our grant money, you know, having money for implementation helps. And one kind of bright spot that I forgot to highlight was in terms of like piloting and demonstrating nature-based adaptation. We expedited it the past 3 years. We expedited this progress in Marin County because we worked with the Marin Community Foundation, and they gave us basically $1 million a year to administer for them. And so we did targeted nature-based adaptation projects. There was like 4 each year, so now we have 12. And those are all on Marin's Bayshore, and we need to learn from all of those and kind of scale those up. So I think that's really effective. Like having a targeted pilot project to figure out which strategies you want to do so that they can be scaled up. And we actually helped them organize a workshop in March to have all the projects talk to each other and work together. And that seemed really effective, and it seemed to really like catalyze their work. Oh, and I was gonna say one more thing too that I brought. I can't pass this around because it's not out yet, but it's the adaptation land use planning guidance for Marin County local governments. And the planning leads will adopt this next week. And this built on Clessy Bennett was actually a CBE fellow of mine a couple summers ago, and she's now the EJ policy lead at BCDC. But I had noticed that there was a real gap in knowledge of regulatory tools and land use planning tools for climate adaptation. And so I worked with a colleague at Georgetown Climate Center who had been working on this. And Clessy came and did amazing research and compiled all these tools for us. We gave them to Marin County, and 2 years later they have this. And they actually even have her research like in an appendix, which is really cool. So this is kind of moving, this helps with implementation too, because counties and cities need to basically rezone so that they can implement adaptation strategies. And so they recommend in here like zoning certain places for living shorelines, zoning places maybe for retreat. And so I think actually putting like these sort of planning tools into general plans sounds like really boring, but is like the actual first step.
So I was thinking about the MTA, and when you showed that map of the Bay Area, you can see that the highway system just rings the Bay Area. It's very close to the shore.
Yeah.
So this is a massive adaptation issue for them. And I just wonder if you could share a bit about what they're thinking.
Yeah.
I was a bit horrified to hear that what they're thinking is they're going to simply try to, I don't know, levee, seawall.
Yeah, and they're saying those are like placeholders and they'll be changed later, so we'll see, but.
I mean, are they thinking longer term about what can be done with this ringing highway system right in many of the flood zones?
They do have long range and short range planning offices, and I work with some folks on projects via MPC. I know that they've identified kind of high-risk areas that are flooding now, and those are projects that are being worked on. So one of them is the Dumbarton Bridge touchdown. Is really vulnerable, and it's right by where the Facebook campus is, and there's South Bay salt ponds are around there, and there's a low-income community. It's like the best test case because there's every like asset and like stakeholder you could ever imagine. So they've identified high-risk areas, and I know that they're getting grant money to focus on those. But they actually, the Regional Transportation Agency, got money from Caltrans through an SB1 grant. Caltrans is our highway people, state highway people, to do a regional assessment that BCDC conducted for them. That's finishing up right now, is the one I talked about, the regional assessment for like transportation, vulnerable communities, development areas, and priority development areas and priority conservation areas. But it doesn't, they didn't necessarily, they thought they wanted to do like a hotspot analysis and look at the system and kind of flag the hotspots, but I don't think the assessment ended up that way, unfortunately. They kind of took like representative assets out as examples and said, within this OLU, we have this transportation asset. But I'm not sure it's going to kind of flag the hotspots. We were hoping it would, but it remains to be seen. The final report hasn't been released yet, so we saw like a second to final. So they said that some of that, they're promising us that some of that is in there, but also said it was just one of those projects where it was scoped and they thought they could do it, but they didn't. So it remains to be seen. It's like they do identify some hotspots, but it might not necessarily be here's the ring of transportation, what are the priorities? Because I know Caltrans has done that, an assessment for the San Francisco Bay, trying to identify that too. So I think people are just like struggling, grappling, trying to get there. And this is what the project was scoped for. So BCDC hasn't released this vulnerability assessment yet, working with MPC. So we'll have to see. But the way that they presented it, it looks like they just chose representative assets rather than like the most at risk, if that makes sense.
So there's, if I'm following you, then there's not yet even discussion of what adaptation options there are for even a hotspot. They're still reluctant to even identify them.
It's hard to tell because I'm not at MTC. And I've been a part of this assessment for the past 2 years, but they haven't released the final yet, so I don't know for sure. But at their second to last meeting, it didn't look like it was like a here's the hotspots for the region. It was more of a like, if you have a highway that's like this highway, do these things. But yeah, I mean, people keep being super shy about adaptation strategies. They'll list like retreat, dune restoration, And for example, for the Dumbarton Bridge touchdown, which is through MTC, I assume they're just doing like these projects one at a time to places that are flooding or going to be flooded soon. But that particular area, this is the fourth sea level rise vulnerability assessment that has been done for this one project area. BCDC did one using their ART method. We funded it using the Cosmos method, which is a USGS model. MTC funded a focused area study, but those three were still not enough, and so there was more public money given to do a more detailed vulnerability assessment and hydrodynamic modeling for the area based on like recent changes to levees and ponds. So it does take a lot of like studying, and it's really frustrating because, for example, we funded the San Mateo wetland study to look at wave attenuation benefits, and they're not looking at that model as an adaptation strategy. They're just going to qualitatively say, and like wetlands could provide protection. So it's really frustrating because here's a place where there's the South Bay salt ponds that are already restored. Here's a place where we do have data on the wave attenuation benefits, and yet it's still so difficult to kind of change a regional transportation agency's planning process. So they're a very like planning agency. It's really hard to penetrate like the Plan Bay Area process. It's very like planner speak, and it's like there's specific meetings for specific things, and there's public meetings for specific things, and it's really hard to kind of change. That's a huge whole structure that needs to be changed, and it's really hard to influence them. So yeah, fingers crossed. Well, I'll send along the BCDC vulnerability assessment when it comes out. I hope it does highlight those hotspots, but we'll see. I'm not sure. Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the things you're describing have competing interests. And I wonder, does the Conservancy provide environmental mediation to resolve the, one group wants a bigger levee, another group wants oysters. How does the Conservancy come to some sort of resolution or assist in resolving those kinds of issues?
Yeah, we definitely have played that role before in projects, and we even have retainer contracts with like facilitation experts and environmental remediation experts. I think in this particular instance, we don't feel like it's our agency's role to do that. We've been doing it kind of on an ad hoc basis, and we've been participating in these processes to the extent that we can make sure our priorities and natural resources and public access are included. But I think our agency it's not really our role to do that on a project by project basis for sure. But in terms of regionally working between, like Charge had this king meeting on October 3rd, and they proposed 3 tide gates in the bay, 3 tidal barriers in the bay, and pumps and like crazy. That would totally choke off our entire estuary and destroy. I haven't seen it yet. I have to get to. But it's not. So that was at like the Charge convening with hundreds of people, and then the front of the room presenting this, and there's not much of a role of us to kind of approach them yet. We have been doing a lot of relationship building. The person that started this group is a flood control engineer from a county, and he's involved in these kind of county calls that I meet every month with 4 counties, and we're moving him to the nature-based side slowly by slowly, but it's kind of like a relationship building thing to kind of bring individual people along even, and open up their eyes to what's out there. Because you can imagine flood control engineers are getting a lot of pressure to like protect human life, and you're like, here's a wetland, so we have to really bridge like that gap and that trust. But I think, just we attend the meetings, we're on the steering committee, we give our input on priorities for nature-based adaptation, and everybody's kind of playing nicely together right now. But it's just difficult because it looks like we're doing a lot, but no one is really, we're kind of all just moving slowly, but no one's really kind of pushing us. Yeah.
I have a quick question, just because it seems like all these different agencies, like when you listed all the acronyms, so all the different local area, regional agencies do work together and collaborate on a lot of different efforts. I know so I'm from air district, but for air districts in the entire state of California, it's been a real issue trying to fight, greenhouse gases. And so does the Bay Area Air Resources District work with coastal conservancy or other different coastal commissions there to try and work together? Because I know down here, all the different regional agencies are very separate, just like what you said, everyone has their own projects, tries to fight the same issue from different angles, but maybe people collaborate a little bit more to get to the same point.
Yeah, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is part of one of the 4 regional agencies. Them, the transportation folks, the BCDC, our regulatory sister for the Bay, and then the Metropolitan the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is not really, it's just the board, there's no more staff anymore. It was merged with the transportation agency. But the Air Quality District works a lot more on emissions reduction, and so they do have, they're doing these kind of targeted projects right now in West Oakland and North Richmond. One of them is a scoping plan, and the other one is actually reducing emissions. But we are working a lot on adaptation. We work on emissions reduction through soil carbon and compost projects and stuff like that. But we don't interface with them a ton. There's these regular meetings of the BARC agencies, and there's the 4 regional agencies, and we go to those. And so we'll see area district folks there. And that's kind of how we coordinate. We'll give updates, and we'll try to coordinate our projects together. It's just not as BCDC's vulnerability assessment results are making it into Plan Bay Area, kind of. It's just not, they're not actually taking the list and putting them in like you would want them to because of timing. So it's those little nuances.
So in the class before this, we saw a really cool example of wetlands that was restored into this very sustainable fishery. So it was providing all kinds of economic activity, carbon sequestration, and it was great for biodiversity. Is there any talk in these projects of using wetlands to provide a sustainable economic solution for communities around here?
I haven't heard of anything like that. But I'm sure people would be open to it. It's hard because there's a lot of protections in the wetlands because there's the copper rail and the salt marsh harvest mouse. And they're 2 very famous native species in the bay, and you can't really do much in the marshes because of those species. You can move them, but there's a lot of regulation from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and on the wetlands because of those species. So that would be probably the biggest impediment that I would think of, but I think that's a great idea.
And those were the saltwater harvest?
Salt marsh harvest mouse.
Salt marsh.
It's really cute. If you Google it, he'll be in a little picture of it. It's really hard to say. And then the other one, it used to be hard to say. It used to be called the Ridgeways Rail, but now it's called, it is called the Ridgeways Rail. It used to be called the Slap Rail. Ridgeways Rail is the other one. Still hard to say. Yeah, but they're the 2 famous species in the bay that we need to protect and limit restoration and things like that. Any more questions?
So one of the things, how would you characterize the state of the metrics, of the measurement? I mean, we say things like the oysters mitigate attenuated waves and salt ponds are the same and both permanent and flooding and everything. But, when you're up against, if someone says, we've got a tidal barrier, it's going to be this high, it's going to protect this property and these people, what's the state of measurement of the flood risk reduction benefits of green infrastructure in the Bay Area?
We are super, super behind. The only ones that I know of are Maryland's Living Shoreline has shown 40% wave attenuation for the oyster reefs, but she's not comfortable telling anybody that at all because she wants to test a couple more sites before.
This oyster reef or oyster reef in general? That one.
And then the San Mateo County wetland study that I talked about was just done a year ago, and I think it's the only one in the bay that looked at wave attenuation benefits.
And actually measure them.
Yeah.
Link them to property.
It didn't link them to property, but the Nature Conservancy is doing a parametric insurance project, and they're going to dig into those details. But I would say that the biggest gap is we need to look at all the other wetlands in the bay. What are those wave attenuation benefits? What are they doing? So I think if people are interested, this TNC parametric insurance project is the one that's furthest ahead in getting us there because San Mateo's wetlands are the only ones that we've looked at the wave attenuation benefit for first. We need to do that in the rest of the bay. But then the Nature Conservancy is digging into the specifics of that, so hopefully we can have people pay insurance. And the cool thing about the wetlands in San Mateo County is that because there's a high sediment supply in the South Bay, some of them persist on their own to 2100, even despite a lot of sea level rise, which is like, yes. So that's the bright spot. But yeah, we need to look at the wave attenuation benefits of all the other wetlands. We need to test more oyster reefs. The Bay Beaches project in Marin is looking at like grain size and flow. We need to do more of that. That is the piece that's missing. That's what we don't know. We don't have the data to prove to like the gray infrastructure engineers that our solution's better. And the issue is we have 11 years to test and scale up.
Yeah.
So we need to like really rally people behind this idea.
And then the other link to that, how long does it take for those benefits to emerge when you're restoring the wetland?
Right.
How long does it take? Depends, I don't know what you're doing, but oyster reefs go quickly.
Oyster reefs are quick. You install them and they're there. You know, wetlands need time to accrete. I think it really depends on the location, like definitely years, decades, years.
Yeah.
3, 2, at least.
But the battles between the
Yeah.
seawall folks and the green infrastructure
It's happening
folks
now.
are going to get more intense.
Oh, for sure. And I know Charge, you know, who's going to get the money? Like, Charge is like the gray infrastructure folks. And they just had a big workshop, they're doing a project map, they might go ask the state or the federal folks for money. They're the engineers. They're the ones that's their job, you know, so it's hard because it's their job, but they want, I think a lot of them want to look at nature-based solutions, but it's just scary, you know.
Or hybrids.
Yeah, or hybrid solutions. And so we're also working with like the San Francisco seawall project. They're putting up a huge seawall in the Embarcadero. They can't do anything else there, so like that's fine. But we're working with them to see if we can put habitat elements on the outside of the seawall to foster habitat. And I think the argument is like, don't we all want to live in a nice place? Like, don't we all want to have habitat and public access like throughout climate change? Why would we? Nobody wants to live in Foster City now with like, you know, 6 additional feet. You can't even see the bay. You have to like walk. You're gonna have to like walk up, you know, out of your little basin to see the bay, like New Orleans, like looking over the levee. So, you know, I think we all want it. It's just like a fear base. It's a fear problem.
I'm wondering if you feel comfortable kind of placing where you think San Francisco Bay Area is in relation to other coastal areas of the country or just other areas of the country in general. You talked a little bit about comparing like to the East Coast and other places, but just if you kind of have a sense of where it stands and if there's any collaboration kind of among different areas that are working on these things.
Yeah, there's definitely, so there's an umbrella called like ARCA, which is supposed to be like a whole collaborative umbrella for all the regional climate collaboratives in California. And ours was called like the Bay Area Collaborative, and that group, BARC, used to get money from them to be our collaborative, but it was only 2 staff. So it wasn't really, they felt like they were checking the box, so we don't have an official one. But there's a Central Coast Climate Collaborative that my colleague Rachel Crouch has been working on that covers this area. And I know Anthony Cooley, or not Anthony Cooley, Juliana Cleo is working on that too, and he's up here. Yeah. And so that's one for the Central Coast that I think it goes down to Santa Barbara from here. And there's one for LA called Lark, and there's one for the north, like more inland. There's one for Sacramento. I think in terms of living shorelines, we're behind the East Coast. In terms of managed retreat, of course, like Alaska, the East Coast, and the Gulf are ahead of us. I think Louisiana State has an LA Safe program, and I think that's the best practice for managed retreat. It's really community-based and community-led, which is like how managed retreat survives. But yeah, you know, it's hard to say because I only work in the Bay and not statewide. People always say California is ahead. Then within the state, people say the Bay Area is ahead, but I feel like we're all kind of planning still. But yeah, I mean, our agency is like the main agency that implements actual projects, and so we've been doing that statewide and in the Bay. So yeah, ahead of other states in some things, but like we can learn from definitely the Gulf for retreat and the East Coast for like oysters and nature-based strategies. Yeah, and I don't mean to be super negative, I just want to be honest with you guys. So saved out, so you guys can come help me get it done here.
Any other questions or comments or reflections or, if not, then please join me in thanking Kelly for